We're going to move along and talk about if statements again. This time we're going to make them a little bit more complicated. Um, and there's a few different ways that we can make them more complicated. And by more complicated, I really mean more useful and able to do a lot more exciting things. So let's take a look at how we can do that. I'm going to put these notes, excuse me, up on the website as well, so you can just go through the notes. But basically, they called what we're about to do, they call it block if statements. And what that means is that instead of just a single if statement, we can create groups of if statements or groups of different tests that you can do in an if statement. So the first one is an if else test. And that, so far we've looked at making just a if test, and we do some things if it's true. Well, what happens if the things are false? What do we do? So if we go over to idle, and we can say food equals so we've got a basic input statement. Now we can say so what's a good fish? A good fish, a good food. And then maybe that's the only food you like. And so you say else print black. So when we run this, if somebody really likes fish, black, the computer doesn't like that. So it does the else statement is anything other than the part they put here. So we go over here and we say mac and cheese, yummy. Now notice that is kind of funny because it thinks that we're typing and is a special word, which we're going to study today actually. But that's okay. It's inside quotes. It just forgets to do that when it's typing it out here. I will show you, and this is another thing we're going to handle today, is if you do something like this, or if you actually typed out macaroni and cheese, but if you do anything other than exactly what we typed, it says black. It only accepts mac and cheese like that. So that's something we're going to want to take a look at. So that's the if statement, or the if else statement. Now, even more interesting, if I can get to it, is that we can have more than two tests. We can have, if a test is true, we do some things. And then we can do what's called an elif. It's kind of a combination of the words if and else, right? Else if another test is true, do some other things. Else if another test is true, do some other things. And you can put as many elifs in here as you want, anywhere from 1 to, whatever, 100 elifs. And then at the end, you can still say else if all of these things were false, then we finally have one thing that we say at the end. And we're going to be doing a lot of these because this is where if statements can really get useful, right? So imagine here you like other foods, or you want to say something about other foods. So you don't want to put an if statement down, and I'll show you why in a little bit, but you want to treat them all as one thing. So let's see, what's another thing that somebody could say that they like? Salsa. I mean, not usually eaten all by itself, but And what's another thing that we can do? Cheese by itself. Now, as I go, and I'm just going to do one more and then we'll play with it. I'll show you something this last time. Let's see. Let's do bagels. I could have done normal things like pizza. Breakfast time. Oh, what I wanted to show you, I'm going to take this out just for a second, is when you put this colon in here, if you remember the colon, that Python, you might have noticed this, it automatically gives you the indent that you're supposed to do to say these are the things I want to happen when when this test is true. If you forget the colon when you hit enter, the computer doesn't know that you want to indent things. Then you have to indent them yourself. So remembering the colon really helps you because it just automatically fixes it for you. Puts it right over there. So there we have it. It's a block if statement. Now what's going to happen is the computer's going to take a look at what we type, and it's going to check this one first. If this one is true, it's going to print this, and then it's going to exit, because once this one's true, it doesn't have to do any of the other ones. And then if this one's false, it's going to do the next one in a line. And if this one's true, it's going to do spicy, and it's going to skip these. So the interesting thing about a block if statement is that it's looking for the first time something is true, and then it can skip them all. So that's a little bit different than if we just did this, where what this would do is, even if this one was true, the computer would go and say, oh, and I wonder if this one is true too. Oh, and I wonder if this one is true too. So you can imagine it takes a little bit longer, because here it's got to evaluate 4 different ones and then finally decide the else. The other thing is, I'm going to run this and show you what happens if we don't use elif. So I'm going to say salsa. And it should say spicy, right? Because that's the one thing we wanted it to say. But what happens is it says spicy and black, because our code is saying, okay, this one's true, and it's saying this one's false, and then this is, okay, this one's false, but the else goes with the last if statement. So like an else and an if go together. So if I use some spacing here to kind of show you what I mean, if I wanted to separate these a little bit, is that now with my spacing I can see this is like a block, and it does these two together, but each of these is individual. So it can say yes to this one. When it comes down here, it says no to this one, but then it has to say yes to the else. And so what you want to do is you want to think of any tests that you have that are related to keep them all together with an elif statement. So we do that. And now it can only choose one of the possible selections instead of like whichever one it happens to be true and multiple ones at the end. So there's your if, elif, else. Now, that allows us to make statements that are really long this way, right? Because we could have like 100 different elif statements, and so we could test for all sorts of different kinds of things. But sometimes you want to do what's called a compound test, where you put 2 tests together in the same line. And you can do that using an and statement or an or statement. And I'm going to show you these, but let me just explain the logic behind it. It's stuff that you probably already know from various classes. But my example I always use is, if I was to say to you, if it is sunny and it is warm, we will go to the beach. So imagine I said this not to you, but to my kids. And they wake up in the morning and they are like, oh, look, it's sunny outside. Oh, and the weatherman says it's going to be 90 degrees today. We're going to the beach because Dad said if it's sunny and warm, we will go to the beach. So if both of these things are true, then we'll do whatever it says that we will do, right? So that's just using common logic. And then the difference with that is the or statement. If I told my kids, if it is sunny or it is warm, we will go to the beach, then I might not be as happy because they're going to wake up in the morning and they're going to say, it's 90 degrees and it's thunderstorming outside, but Dad said if it's sunny, okay, it's not, or it's warm, it's warm, we will go to the beach. And so in this case, only one of them has to be true, and it will do the thing that we said we would do. Now, if it is both sunny and warm, it'll still do it because at least one of them has to be true, but it's okay if they're both true. Right? The other situation is in the winter. It might be a nice wintry day just after a snowstorm. So it's perfectly sunny out when you go outside and the sun's shining on the snow, but it's still negative 50 degrees out. And again, this says, well, it's sunny, therefore this is true, therefore we will go to the beach. Depending on what result you want, sometimes you do want two things to have to be true. Sometimes you just want one thing to be true. The example I'm going to use today is the or statement. I'll see if I can think of an and statement as we go. Now, this last note I'm going to put on here, and I'm going to come back to it in a minute to show you what I mean by this. But if I have this on here, maybe you can pause it if you need to write that down, and it will make sense in a minute. So I'm going to go over to idle again. And here is where I find this is very useful. If you're telling it to type in something, and you think you're not sure how the person's going to type it in, you can use an or statement. So if my food equals mac and cheese, or if my food equals capital mac and cheese, right? So now it could be this, or it could be this, and they will both end up saying yummy. Now there's another solution we can do for this too. We can actually do a little fool around with the string and make it so capitals don't matter, which will be covered in a string badge. Maybe you've already done that one and you're like, I know the answer. But even if we didn't have that, what if they were to type macaroni and cheese, because that's what it's actually called, right? So let me go back to lowercase here. And I'm even going to just take this one out for now. You can have many or statements. So you can have this going way down the list. But now I could type in mac and cheese, or I could type in macaroni and cheese, and both are going to say yummy, right? So you can imagine that it's like, or food equals chips and salsa. Cheese or food equals string cheese. Bagels or food equals donuts. So I've just created more choices, right? And it could be either one of these. It could be either one of these. And so that's how you can do the or statement. Now, the one thing that's important, well, let me just show you. I'll just type in donuts here. Breakfast time. So it said this one's true. And because this one's true, we're going to do this. So if I go back here, the important thing is this. If I had two if statements, and I want to put an and or an or between them, the full test, x less than 10, x greater than 20, has to be in the command with an and between them. You can't say, oh, the computer knows what I'm talking about, because we would say this in English. If x is less than 10 and greater than 20. We could say that in English and you would understand what I mean. The computer needs a full test on both sides of the and. In other words, well, I can't just say this. If the food equals mac and cheese or macaroni and cheese. That sounds good to us and you're going to constantly be forgetting, but you cannot get away with just saying that. What happens, this is kind of weird, but it's kind of like philosophical. So Do you think that macaroni and cheese by itself exists? Because what happens is we say, what's my favorite food? Donuts. And it says yummy. Now, yummy is what it's supposed to say with macaroni and cheese. So no matter what happens, it says this is true because it doesn't say that anything is equal to it. So there's your tests. If I was to throw one more in here, I could say drink. And then I'm just going to get rid of all of these for right now, just to focus on this one. What if they were to say, my favorite food is hamburger, and my favorite drink is soda. And so that's how you could use an and statement. Doesn't make sense to use an and statement with food equals hamburger and food equals fries, because how could food be two things at the same time? But an and statement is good for checking two things out at the same time. If the food is this and the drink is this, then we have ourselves a good meal. So that is the basics of if statements. And like I said, this is where if statements get to be really powerful and really useful and really fun. So enjoy.